Can something be beautiful and evil? That was the question that would seal my fate. My father told me the outside world was a graveyard, a place that swallowed my mother whole. But as I looked at the endless, suffocating green of my home, I realized something terrifying. I didn't care if it killed me. I just wanted to see it. Once. The Christmas lights in the city are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, Aurelia. Esmeralda lay across my bed, her voice dripping with a poison I was desperate to drink. Sunlight caught the dust motes dancing around her black curls, a stark contrast to the fear gripping my chest. "Come on," she drawled. "You can't deny, you're curious." "You know we mustn't," I whispered, clutching my book like a shield. But my shield was cracking. We are nymphs. Healers. Prey. Centuries ago, the elders built Arden to hide us. We have no claws, no fangs. We are defenseless against the wolves and vampires that hunt beyond the tree line. We are supposed to live, marry, and die in this secret city without ever taking a breath of free air. But Esmeralda? She had already tasted it. It was like the first breath of fresh air, she said, her eyes wild. Decorated cakes. Bakeries. Clothes that actually have style. Aurelia, live for once. Live for yourself. The promise of freedom washed over me, a terrifying adrenaline rush. Very well, I breathed out. When? 2 days, she squealed. We slip away during the Christmas celebration. It was set. But the next morning, the guilt sat heavy in my stomach as my father flipped blueberry pancakes, his smile oblivious to my betrayal. I was daydreaming about the outside world. I tested him. The air in the room froze. "That evil world took your mother," he snapped, his eyes burning with a grief that never healed. "It is a world of selfish, little-minded people. It is dangerous." His fear was palpable, but so was my hunger. I looked out at the wild lilacs swaying in the wind. I wanted to see the magic I read about in my tattered books. I wanted to see if Esmeralda was right. There are always two sides to a story. The monster my father described, or the ethereal dream Esmeralda promised. Could it be both? Could something be beautiful and evil? I was about to find out.
Introductory Author's Insight. In Chapter 2, I wanted to paint a picture of exactly what Aurelia is leaving behind. It's easy to run away from a prison cell, it is much harder to run away from a paradise. You'll notice that Arden is full of flowers, laughter, and community. It's beautiful.
Chapter 2. My father thinks the outside world is dangerous, I said to Esme as we walked through the meadows. The long green grass tickled my bare knees. She stayed silent in consideration before she spoke. Fear is the main reason we've been stuck in here for years. Although I was a little frightened by my father's outlook on the outside world, the spark of curiosity was ignited within me, and I couldn't put it out. I longed to see the truth for myself, to venture out to where not many of my kind had been. I couldn't deny the beauty of Arden, though. It was a sacred place in nature, where forest nymphs thrive. I couldn't imagine a world outside my own. From what I've heard from Esme in the town, there were no trees, no grass, and no signs of nature until you reached the outskirts of the city, only markets and people. But what I heard her talk about the most was the Christmas lights. Every Christmas, the humans would decorate the town with Christmas lights and decorations, and would celebrate with songs in the middle of the city. Esme told me that werewolves were there too, among the humans, singing along. "We'll have to be careful and mask our scent," she said thoughtfully. "Will they be able to tell?" I couldn't mask the fear in my voice, but she waved it away with a simple gesture. Even without masking, they might not even notice. We don't have a distinctive scent as fairy folk, but it's sweeter and more alluring than that of a human's. They might even chalk it up to perfume given their lack of experience with nymphs, but we can never be too careful. She sighed as we came to a clearing. "No, not that one. I don't want the blue and red flowers together. Here, these white ones will complement it," Fern said, her voice resonating over all the chatter in the clearing. I could see they were beginning to set up for tomorrow's celebration. The tables were set in the middle of the clearing, and lanterns hung from the trees, their different feathers trailing on strings. Bouquets were put on each table, and in the middle was the biggest table, the one on which the ritual would be done. Every year at Christmas, our leading elder would perform a ritual, praying to the gods to ensure our protection and prosperity. I saw that some of the ingredients were left on the table, the smudging bowl along with sage, sweetgrass, and angelica. You too. I thought you'd never get here, Fern said as she approached us with a grin. I'm still lacking some of the herbs for the ritual. Can you two stop by Alina's and grab some chamomile and rosewater? We'd be happy to, I smiled back at her softly. And don't overwork yourself, Fern. The celebration is hours away, and it looks like you're making great progress. She nodded enthusiastically. It would be a lot faster if some people actually listened to me. Did I not say where to put those blue poppies? She said, her eyes locked on the poor soul behind us. Esme grabbed my hand and pulled me aside, down the little path that led to the rest of the city. The city of Arden isn't precisely a city, it's more of a large, complex garden. We have our houses, a few ponds and rivers, and, in the main village, a few trades. We have a flower shop and an antique shop that sometimes bring in lost books and odd items if any nymphs are ever outside the city. Yes, occasionally a few fairy folk are allowed out, but only to scout the area. What good would it be if we hid in secret only for the forest to be uprooted? That's why we always have one runner at a time. A runner goes out into the world once a month and tries to extract information while keeping an eye on the town and forest. However, there are expectations you must meet as a runner. If you are caught at any point, your life is forfeit. Not that a runner will likely be seen, as their name suggests, they're swift, both mentally and on their feet. Currently, our runner is Finley. Yes, the same Finley to whom I am betrothed. We also have a herbalist, Alina, who is Finley's mother and who we're currently headed towards. I knew I didn't love Finley. We had been close friends since I could walk, so I guess I was marrying him out of comfort and familiarity. As nymphs, we don't get much of a choice about who we fall in love with, given our limited population. I was lucky, and I realized that. Aurelia, Esmeralda, how can I help you? Is it Finley you're looking for? He's upstairs if you'd like me to fetch him. That's not necessary, Esme smiled. Fern just sent us down for rosewater and chamomile. Alina's eyes lit up. Oh, I was supposed to bring those down earlier. It completely slipped my mind. It's no bother. We can bring them down for you now. The celebration is coming along nicely, so there's no rush, I assured her, and she nodded in acceptance as she turned back into the shop to retrieve the items. Is that Aurelia? Finley called as he waltzed into the room, grinning at me flirtatiously. Finley, as attractive as he was, with sky-blue eyes and messy blonde hair, was an utter dork. Indeed it is. Alina smiled slightly and reached for the herbs. My day has just gotten considerably brighter, he said, winking towards me, and I let out a light laugh. He took the herbs, wrapped them up, and bound them with thread. I'll walk you two back. I'm sure Fern will call for me to do some of the heavy work at some time. He flexed with absolutely zero subtlety, and I couldn't help but laugh at his antics. What, you and your non-existent muscles? He gasped and crossed his heart with his hand. I'm appalled you'd view your future husband in that way. I shrugged. Hey, when is the last time you went outside the village? He looked away. The month is almost up, and then I'm back out again. I felt a strange tension running through the air, and I raised my question softly. Do you not like being outside of Arden? He contemplated my question, looking uncertain of how to answer. I think I realize more and more about how big the world we're missing out on is every time I go out. The world that the elders spoke of, I have seen it. But I've seen one that isn't that different than in here. They don't have the same sense of closeness, but people are kind and interesting, and their world is so fascinating. I'm torn because sometimes I think I'd never leave Arden if I had the choice, and other times I find it suffocating. He grinned over at me. But the elders are not to be disobeyed.
Author's insight. This line, the elders are not to be disobeyed, is the exact moment Aurelia realizes she cannot marry him. Finley has seen the world and chosen submission. Aurelia hasn't even seen it yet, but she is already choosing rebellion. That gap between them is now unbridgeable.
Story continues. I felt nerves settle into my stomach as Esmeralda tossed me an uneasy look that, thankfully, Finley didn't pick up on. I almost felt guilty for wanting to leave Arden, but I just wanted to see it once. That would satisfy my curiosity, and then I'd come back, and I'd be perfectly content with living the rest of my life in the little hidden city of Arden.
End of chapter analysis. I think the most dangerous lie in this entire chapter is the one Aurelia tells herself at the very end, that would satisfy my curiosity, and then I'd come back. In my experience writing characters like this, curiosity is never satisfied by a single taste, it is only deepened. Aurelia believes she can dip her toe in the water and then return to her safe, arranged life with Finley. But she doesn't understand that once you expand your horizon, your old world shrinks. Finley is the tragic counterpoint here. He is a runner, he physically leaves the city, but mentally, he never left. He is the perfect citizen because he values safety over truth. Aurelia is the opposite. She is physically trapped but mentally gone. The tragedy is that she thinks she can have both worlds. She is about to learn that you have to choose one, and the price of admission is everything you used to know. Audience engagement questions. Do you think Finley is right to trust the elders and stay safe, or is he letting fear control his life? Aurelia says she will only go just once and then be happy. Do you believe her, or is she lying to herself? If you lived in a paradise like Arden but were never allowed to leave, would you feel safe or suffocated? The decision is made and the plan is set, but the outside world isn't just waiting for Aurelia, it's hunting, and she has no idea what sweet scent actually attracts in the dark.
Chapter 3. Here you are, Fern. As you requested. Finley gave her a cheeky grin as he left the items on the table, and she snapped her fingers at him. He's a keeper, Aurelia. Finley turned to me, waggling his eyebrows. Hear that, Aurelia? I'm a keeper. I rolled my eyes as Fern looked over the herbs to make sure we brought the right amount. Okay guys, this looks good. I think we're okay for help until we start baking some of the cakes tonight. I will personally help in that regard, Finley suggested, and Fern was quick to throw him a deadpan look. I actually want someone who isn't going to eat everything they make. That's just asking too much of me, Fern. You guys can take a break for now if you want. It's around lunchtime anyway. Here, I've packed you some food to take with you, she said, grabbing the basket that sat on the table behind her. You know what? I really love chicken, Finley said as he stuffed his third sandwich back down his throat. You don't say. Esme said sarcastically, and he merely grinned back, his mouth full of chicken. Look, the apple tree. Help me grab them, Aurelia. I got up and dusted down my dress. Another thing about Arden is that it was always summer. Here, the seasons don't change. It was always warm and sunny, so nature was always blossoming. What, you don't want my help? Esme asked rhetorically as she lay sprawled out under the sun. You're too short to reach the apples anyway, Pipsqueak, he teased, and she shot up suddenly, a look of betrayal on her face. Finley, I will eat all of your chicken. He gasped dramatically. I can't believe you'd make a threat like that. She lay back down, huffing. I didn't plan on getting up anyway. I laughed from where I was, leaning to grab an apple that had gotten caught in one of the branches. Here, I got it, Finley said as he moved behind me. We need to talk, he said quietly, but moved to grab the apple as if he hadn't said anything. Okay, I said, confusion shining through my eyes. He looked behind me skeptically to where Esme was just out of hearing range. I can't right here. I couldn't think of anything he wouldn't be able to tell me in front of Esme, as there was nobody else around. He sensed my confusion, and I saw the plea in his eyes. Can I talk to you tomorrow night? At the celebration. I grimaced. That's not really a good time, Finley. He closed his eyes in frustration. I'm running out of time here, Aurelia. I looked up at him, trying to gauge his emotions, but I could only pick up on the desperation and fear that leaked through his eyes. Finley? I said tenderly. Is everything okay? He looked away once more before his eyes settled on mine, and I could sense that he was battling with himself on whether he could tell me or not. I looked to where Esme was still sprawled under the sun. She couldn't see us from where she lay, so I grabbed Finley and pulled him deeper into the forest, out of her earshot. "What's going on?" He breathed deeply, his fists clenching as he met my eyes, his own hardening as he spit it out. "I can't marry you, Aurelia." I wasn't shocked. I mean, I completely expected to be shocked, but I really wasn't. I wasn't upset either. I loved Finley with all my heart, but solely on a platonic level. I stopped for a second, looked down at the ground, and said, "Okay. Are you okay though? Don't tell me that telling me was stressing you out this much, Finley. You know that I only ever loved you as a friend. I'd much rather try to fall in love the right way. That's the thing, Aurelia. I've fallen in love with someone else." His eyes were wide, mine filled with joy for him, until I took in his panicked and defeated look. "Just not someone from Arden. Aurelia, watch where you're mixing." "You're spilling the batter," Esme said as she watched me skeptically. I was still in a daze from earlier this morning. Just not someone from Arden, asterisk. That meant that he had fallen in love with someone from the outside world. I remembered the strangled look on his face as he kept speaking to me. "She's gone, Aurelia. I went to meet her a few days ago, and her friends said that she just disappeared. But I know we'd planned an entire future together. She wouldn't just. I can't believe that she'd just leave and abandon that. I have to find her. I have to figure out what happened." "You've been leaving Arden that much?" I asked, and he raised a hand to his head. "I know. It was stupid. But I couldn't help it. It happened before I had realized. It's selfish and horrible, but I can't stay here, Aurelia. The things I've seen out there. The places I've heard about. We're trapped in here, Aurelia, like animals." He paused, his voice trembling slightly. "They say that it's to protect us, but who's it to protect really? What happens when war spreads again and this forest burns in a fire? The city will be lost, and our people will die in seconds. This city does not mean safety. It teaches us to rely on something unnatural to keep us alive. When that's stripped from us, we die." "Finley," I trailed off, unsure of what to say. Both Finley and Esme seemed so adamant about running away from the city of Arden, from the walls that had kept us safe as war raged outside. I longed to see the magical world that lay past it, but could I abandon what kept me safe for so long? My mother had left, and she had never come back. My father's face flashed in my mind as the elders told him she would not return. I watched helplessly as grief tore through his body and crawled up his veins, infusing with his very soul. I saw a proud man crumble and turn against the world beyond. "We're not free in here, Aurelia," Finley said, and I could not choose which side to go to as war raged in my mind. "When?" I managed to croak out, and his eyebrows raised. "When what? When are you leaving?" His shoulders dropped, his eyes widening in surprise. "Tomorrow night. Change of plans, buddy. So are Esme and I." His eyes lit up in surprise, but I beat his complaints. We had already planned to sneak out. "I wanted to see the outside world just once. Maybe we could even help you find your missing love." "Absolutely not. I'm not dragging both you and Esme into my mess. I don't know where I'll end up or what kind of trouble I'll get myself into. Never mind the fact that we'd all be cast out of Arden. I can't, Aurelia. I can't have that kind of guilt on my shoulders. I'll help you two sneak out, but before the night is over, you must come back unnoticed." I grimaced, sensing that he wasn't about to budge on the subject. "Finley, you'll never be allowed back in?" He looked away solemnly. "I have to find her, Aurelia." So it was settled. Tomorrow night, Esme, Finley, and I will sneak out of the lost city of Arden into the world that many have condemned and scorned. I only wanted to see it once, to experience it once. A bird could only see if it's trapped from outside its cage. Chapter 4. I smoothed down the dress I had chosen for the festivities tonight, a deep red that complemented my long, golden hair. My lips were covered in some red paint from crushed cranberries, and I wore a threaded bracelet around my wrist. "I can't believe that idiot would fall in love with someone outside of Arden," Esme hissed, and I tossed her a side glance. "It's romantic, I think." I smiled softly, and she threw me a deadpan look. Yes, a forbidden love that gets you cast out of the city and possibly killed. How utterly romantic. I rolled my eyes as Esmeralda pushed the satchels under my bed. We had to be prepared for tonight. We had a change of clothes that would allow us to move more freely, along with some human money, food, and water. Finley told us he'd take care of the rest. Esmeralda wore a long lilac dress, and her dark black curls hung down her back. I've never felt such excitement, Aurelia. I couldn't deny the excitement running through my own veins. However, it was accompanied by nerves and the guilt eating away at me that I was doing this behind my father's back. I sighed deeply, and Esme tossed me a comforting smile. It'll be fine, Aurelia. You two look gorgeous, my father said as we came into the room. Are you okay to stay at Esmeralda's tonight? I won't be home until late after the festivities, my father asked, and I felt nerves crawl up my chest, but I smiled softly and nodded. We left to walk towards the main clearing, where all the festivities were taking place, including the ritual we were leaving straight after. Fern spotted us and smiled brightly, dressed in a bright orange dress. Her dark curls were pulled back and interlaced with beads of every color. Laketon, she said tenderly as she approached my father and hugged him. Next, her eyes moved towards Esme and me, and lit up. I still remember when you two were small children. Time moves so quickly, she said softly. My father was quick to agree, and after idle chit-chat, she pointed us towards our table. I saw Finley and Alina were already there, along with a few other familiar faces. Good evening, my father greeted Esme and me as we took our seats beside Finley. He gave me a small, knowing smile just as the food began to be served. I grinned widely, my eyes not leaving the trays brimming with heavenly-looking food. After the food came the dancing. Soft music filled the space, and people began to fill it. Would you do me the honors? Finley asked, extending his hand towards me. I gave him a quick smile before accepting his hand and letting him lead me towards the middle of the clearing. Around us, the adults awed and swooned at an apparent young love, but little did they know. Finley wrapped his arm around my waist and smiled politely at the people around us. Are you two set for tonight? He whispered, his facial expression remaining the same carefree and happy demeanor. I nodded quickly. Yes, and you have the masking potion? He nodded again, turning to swirl me out of earshot of the couple by our side. He tossed me a charming smile. Why, of course, darling. I grinned, catching on to the game he was playing. I saw Esmeralda dancing with another nymph in the corner, her eyes meeting mine under the Tuscan lanterns and glinting dangerously. There was an unspoken tension in the air tonight, something only we three could pick up on. Did you taste the chocolate ganache? You know I helped bake that. Finley added, and I let out a light laugh. And probably ate half of it in the process, I suppose? His eyes lit up like wildfire, burning feverishly under the dark sky. You know me so well. I offered a small smile, my lip quirking up. Always. Attention, please. The leading elder's voice cut through the night like a knife, loud and crisp. I broke apart from Finley just as the elder reached the ritual table. We will begin the sacred ritual now. As we do every year, we thank the gods for providing us with a home to protect us and keep us hidden. We also pray for continued protection and prosperity. I returned to my table beside my father, who nodded politely at Finley. The elder lit the 2 wicker-held candles on fire, and the flames rose high into the night air. He began reciting lines that I knew by heart, and I subconsciously began to say them in my head along with him. Now, we will pray together. The voices of the city of Arden blended into one as people began to recite the ancient words, only for a few moments before it was over. The elder nodded, smiling. I pray the gods will keep showing us their kindness. That is all. You may return to the party. I exchanged glances with Esmeralda and Finley and turned to my father. I don't feel too well. I think I might go back to the village and rest. My father gave me a worried glance. Are you okay? Would you like me to walk back with you? I smiled slightly. No, that's all right. I think I'm just a little tired. I didn't sleep well last night. He nodded in understanding. Very well, I'll see you sometime tomorrow. I nodded, hugging him before I continued away from the festivities and people towards the quiet and empty village with Esmeralda. Finley nodded on our way out, silently letting us know he'd soon follow us when he could discreetly slip away. We hurried back to my house, to where we had tucked a change of clothes under my bed. The clothes were warmer than we could find, and even then we added layers. As it was always summer in the city of Arden, we'd never experienced the cold. Finley, however, told us that the human world would be freezing this time of year. I pulled the thick wool jumper over my head, pairing it with loose matching pants before I tugged on a warm coat. Finley managed to grab the clothes from the antique shop where he worked, assuring us we'd stand out a lot less and they'd help keep us warm. Finally, I tugged a maroon hat over my head, laughing slightly at the little bauble attached to the end. "Are you ready?" Esme asked, and I shrugged as the exhilaration made its comeback, and I felt so buzzed that I could barely keep up. "I still can't believe I'm doing this," I whispered, and she tossed me a stark look. "Keep all your dreaminess until we reach the human world. We have to focus now." And just like that, I had my head screwed back in my shoulder, and I was ready to brave the world. "Aurelia, Esmeralda?" Finley whispered into the empty hallway. "We're here," I called back lightly, and he pushed the door to my room open and stepped in. He was dressed in similar clothes and had an old bag slung over his shoulders. Esmeralda handed me a bag, and I swung it over my own shoulders as she did the same. That covered our food and money. Finley took out a small, clear bottle and gave us a grin. "It'll help with your scent, just in case," he said as he sprayed us both before spraying himself. "Ready?" I gave him a sure nod, and we exited the house. Thankfully, the village was still empty, and we could hear the festivities in full swing at the clearing. "It's over here," Finley said as he began to walk into the heavier parts of the forest. I had only been a few steps in to collect firewood, but now I was venturing into the depths of it. We walked for quite some time before we came to an old wicker bridge. Beyond it lay 2 oak trees, perfectly opposite each other. They gave us a weird energy, and Finley explained. "This is the border to the city of Arden. The weird energy you can feel is very old magic. We step through here, and then we'll be in the human world. It's exactly the same to return. You just come through where we'll pass and come through these trees again." He grinned at us, moving to go through first. I breathed deeply before stepping through.
Introductory Author's Insight. Author's note: this is the moment the world expands and then shatters. I structured this chapter to lull you into the same false sense of security that Aurelia feels. The cotton candy, the lights, the Ferris wheel, it all feels like a dream because it is a dream. But notice how quickly the tone shifts. I introduced the alpha's perspective mid-chapter to show you that while Aurelia is looking at the lights, the predator is looking at her. And then, I broke the dream with violence. The vampire attack isn't just an action scene, it is the brutal reality check that safety outside Arden is a myth. Aurelia thinks she is being saved at the end, but she is actually being claimed.
Chapter 5. The outside world felt as much like the city of Arden as the city itself. I don't know what I was expecting. Does the air feel different? The only difference was the sheer adrenaline that ran through my veins. I felt like running and yelling as we walked quietly through the trees. I began to see the city's outline, and my eyes caught the bright glimmer of lights. "Oh my God, it's so pretty," I mumbled as we finally reached the edge of the forest and the entire town spread out before us. I saw the entry sign for the city of Littlewood. But beyond that was what made me stop in my tracks and stare. That moment felt utterly surreal. I could feel the crisp night air in my lungs as clouds of my breath waved through the air. The town was filled with Christmas decorations, lights strung everywhere, along the edges of buildings and around lampposts. In the center of the city, there was a large tree, wrapped in more lights with silver decorations glimmering under the silken sky. It took my breath away. "Is it everything you expected?" Esmeralda whispered to me, and I numbly nodded. Finley leaned towards me, bumping his shoulder into mine. "Come on." He gestured for us to follow him, and we did so, through the cobblestone streets of Littlewood. It was dry, but the pavements were covered in a fresh layer of snow, leaving footprints as we walked. People wandered through the town. It wasn't hectic, but there were enough people to make it seem busy. It was almost overwhelming, blending into a crowd where nobody knew you, to go completely unnoticed. We walked along the streets, stopping at stalls here and there. I saw a colorful blur of something called cotton candy that Esmeralda promised we'd stop for before the end of the night. They had little pastries and cakes, various hot drinks, and food. There were also stalls for jewelry, hats, bags, and more. Here. Finley stopped suddenly, pulling some human money out of his pocket. These are amazing. I looked up at the stand that sold chocolate crepes, whatever they were. But soon I found out as I downed the gooey goodness. Thank you for convincing me to come tonight, I whispered to Esmeralda as she gave me a bright smile back, just as high on the atmosphere as I was. The human world was magical. Watch, the wolves are starting to come in, Finley whispered over to me, and I noticed people coming into the town together, laughing and talking as they walked around the stalls. Just as they came in, the town children headed toward the center and began singing Christmas songs. Can we go listen? I pleaded, and Finley laughed, nodding his head. After we can go on the big wheel? He suggested, and I followed his gaze towards the spinning wheel in the sky, craning my neck up. Wait, we go up in that thing? I asked frantically, and he took one look at my face and burst out laughing. Esmeralda joined in, and we stood for a second, simply enjoying each other's company before the music filled the air. I looked toward the bright young faces and smiled, relaxed. You're actually serious, oh my god, I said suddenly as we waited in line to go up in the big wheel. I watched in complete disbelief as the huge object lit up brightly against the dark sky and kept spinning. Don't tell me you're actually scared of this. Esme laughed, and I turned to her suddenly. Look at it. Even the trees of Arden don't reach that height, I said, and Finley wrapped his arm around my shoulders, smiling tenderly. Alpha Isaiah's POV. The second I stepped through the town's gate, I stopped in my tracks, my entire body freezing. I could feel the shock and joy racing through my mind and body, and I almost wanted to race through the town like a madman, chasing the scent of wild lilac and morning grass. I knew exactly what that scent meant. After 4 years of searching for it, I longed for nothing more than my mate. I had been a bit hesitant to come down today, as I usually skip the festivities, but my beta warned me that there were increasing sightings of vampires along the city's border, and it left me unnerved. So I came, just in case any guests decided to drop in unannounced. Humans knew of werewolves and vampires. However, in this town, wolves and humans lived in harmony. We protected the city, and they welcomed us into the community with open arms. As the alpha of one of the biggest packs in the country, I couldn't ask for more. Across the country, there were only 10 packs. All alphas were either handed down the title by their father or chosen by the High Council. Within those 10 packs were about 200 sub-packs that littered the country. They each had alphas in charge of them, but ultimately, they reported to the 10 main alphas of the country, and I was proudly one of those 10. I had been waiting for my mate since the age of 18, when most wolves find their other half. I was currently 22, and had been around the entire country searching for her, only to see her in my own town. I longed to see her at that very second, but I tried to remain calm, reminding myself that it would happen naturally. My beta, Alistair, turned to me, his eyes lit up in confusion. You okay, man? My wolf growled in my head, commanding me to rip through the town until I had my mate safely in my arms. I ignored him, simply responding, I don't want to scare her away, you moron. I can't risk this. She's here, I said calmly, and Alistair stopped in his tracks, his disbelieving eyes meeting mine, and I saw the joy racing through them. Our Luna. I nodded, and his reaction was to start whooping and racing around the town like a madman. I closed my eyes, relishing in the feeling of her being here somewhere, so close to being found. I opened my eyes, the dark gray cutting through the night air. My pack moved around me joyfully, news spreading that their Luna was somewhere in the town. I followed the scent carefully, seeing that it led towards the Ferris wheel. Finley handed the man the money, and slowly I got into the small compartment, feeling uneasy as it swayed beneath my feet. I quickly hurried to the seat as Esme jumped in after me, causing the entire thing to shake as she bounced over the seat carelessly. "Don't be scared, Aurelia. This is the least scary part of the evening, if anything." She laughed as her eyes reflected the lights of the Ferris wheel. I smiled softly as the compartment began to move slowly. After a sharp intake of breath and a moment of panic, I began to calm down. I saw the world beneath us shrink and shrink until it blended into one vast landscape, a vast mesh of color. "Wow, it's beautiful," I said slowly, looking down at the rest of the world. My eyes wandered around to the other carts before I stopped in my tracks, and I saw bright golden eyes staring back at me. He was 3 carts down from me, but I could tell from where I was that he was, without a doubt, the most attractive man I'd ever laid eyes on. I felt calm watching him as I couldn't be sure he even noticed me with the distance between us. He was a werewolf, I could tell by his golden glowing eyes. He had short dark brown curls that framed a face chiseled to perfection. I sighed deeply, wondering what it would feel like under my hands. I was lost in my own little world until Esme spoke. "Aurelia? That wolf is staring at you very intensely," she whispered beside me, and Finley looked up quickly, his eyes hard. "After this, you guys gotta go," he said heartily, and I nodded, crestfallen. I wasn't sure if I was sad to leave this magical night or to leave those haunting golden eyes. I fought the desire to turn and look for the mystery man again. It was probably just my own vivid imagination built up from all the romance novels I cherished. Things like that didn't happen in real life. "What the fuck?" Finley spat out as he craned his head out of the cart. I turned to see what all the commotion was and stopped suddenly in my tracks. Just as my eyes met the scene, the scream started. I saw a vampire attack its victim as all chaos broke loose on the ground. Vampires flooded the city and began attacking people left and right. Just our luck to come in the middle of a vampire attack. Finley sighed, his eyes hard and frightened. We were nearing the ground, and my blood froze in my body as I saw the horror to its full extent. The white snow was stained with blood as people screamed and fled from the vampires. There were about 10 of them altogether. One by one, wolves started to shift and fight back. "Don't look," Finley said as he went to cover my eyes. "End of the road, guys," the ticket man said, his eyes filled with fear as the cart came to a stop. "Dude, you must be joking. Can you not send us up again?" Esme pleaded, and the man looked back at the scene once more, nodding as he sent us up again. I breathed deeply as we began to move, but my relief was short-lived. "Now, where do you think you're going?" I saw an ashen face and red eyes come from the man just as our cart lifted off the ground. The vampire snapped the man's neck, and I let out a shriek, willing the cart to move faster, away from the ground. The vampire grinned at us, showing his fangs. "I can't let 2 beauties get away now, can I?" He flicked the switch on the cart, and we stopped moving, suspended just off the ground. He grabbed the side of our cart and lifted himself into it. I shrieked as he made a move to hold me. Finley intervened, and the vampire hit him, sending him over the railing and onto the ground below.
Author's insight. When I wrote Finley getting thrown over the railing, I wanted to strip Aurelia of her last safety net. Finley was her guide, her protector, and her link to home. Now he is gone, and she is suspended in the air with a monster. She is utterly alone, until she isn't.
Story continues. I watched him tumble over, shock and anger building up in my stomach. His slimy hands moved to grab me, and I kicked my leg out, kicking him frantically, and Esme did the same from her end. "You're going to have to do a little more than kick me, loves." He laughed just as a body launched itself into the cart, taking the vampire by surprise as he moved quickly, and in seconds, he had the vampire's neck in his hands, and he snapped it. He grabbed the limp body and threw it from the cart to where it was mauled by wolves down below. I saw Finley standing to the side, looking confused and worried but alive. I felt warm arms wrap around me, and in my frozen, confused state, I snuggled into the warmth, unsure whether to cry or laugh. I was overtaken by the scent of cinnamon and the forest, but I was still in such shock from the attack that I cherished it, moving closer to the mystery man, who growled in approval and nuzzled into my neck, breathing deeply. Then he said one word that sent a million tiny shocks through my body. Mate.
End of chapter analysis. Author's perspective. The word mate is the ultimate cliffhanger, but I want you to look at the context. Aurelia didn't choose this man, she fell into his arms out of terror. She is traumatized, shocked, and vulnerable. Alpha Isaiah believes this is destiny. He smells lilac and grass and thinks he has found his queen. But Aurelia doesn't know the rules of this world. To her, he is just a stranger who killed a monster. This misunderstanding is the seed of the entire conflict to come. He thinks he is claiming his soulmate, she thinks she is just being rescued. When the shock wears off, she is going to realize that being a mate to an alpha isn't a title, it's a sentence. And she just got a life term. Audience engagement questions. Isaiah waited 4 years for this moment, but he found her in the middle of a slaughter. Is this fate, or a bad omen for their relationship? Aurelia leans into him for comfort without knowing who he is. Is this her instincts taking over, or just pure shock? If you were Finley watching from the ground, would you try to get her back, or would you run before the alpha sees you? The vampire is dead, but the real danger has just begun. The alpha has spoken, and in the werewolf world, that word is a binding contract you can't break.
Chapter 6. Very slowly, I turned to face him, my bright green eyes wide and frozen. His eyes bore into mine, the glowing gold calming to a dark gray. He leaned to brush his fingertips against my cheek, and I felt a rush of warmth overwhelm me. His short brown curls fell just over his eyes as he smiled slightly. I've been looking for you. Mate, asterisk. My mind flashed back to the book I read about werewolves. I got lost in the pages that described the magic of the mate bond. Soulmates, two pieces that fit inexplicably together. The other half of your soul. Aurelia, what's going on? I heard Esme's shaky voice carried over the wind. Down below, I heard Finley yelling as the wolves held him back. Aurelia, the man muttered, his eyes wide and glimmering as if he couldn't believe the words that fell off his tongue. My mind flashed once more to the words that I had read many moons ago, about how possessive wolves are when it comes to their mates. It changes your entire life. But I really couldn't deal with this, not when I had to return to the city of Arden tonight. There must be some kind of mistake, I said softly, and his eyes flashed golden for a second before he offered me the gentlest look he could. There is no mistake. I'm the alpha of Willow Creek, and you, my love, are my mate. The name rang a bell, vaguely. I believed it was one of the country's main packs. This realization sent shivers through me as the full extent of what was happening dawned on me. I don't even know your name, I said quietly, looking away. Anywhere other than his eyes. I felt his hands running through my blonde hair softly. Isaiah. I felt overwhelmed and sank into my own body, my mind going numb. Jesus. He let out a gruff laugh. Don't be afraid, my love. This is one of the best things you'll ever experience. I won't pressure you into anything. We can take it at your pace. I raised an eyebrow. That didn't sound like it corresponded to what I had read about their kind. I pushed myself out of the seat and out of his grip, grabbing onto Esme's wrist as I dragged her down after me. I think she got the memo as we began to sprint through the town, in the direction of the forest. Wait, Aurelia. Isaiah growled in the near distance, but we ran quickly. Being blessed by the speed of nymphs, it wasn't challenging to outrun him. The surprise factor helped quite a bit. I saw, much to my dismay, that the wolves had blocked the entrance of the city, and I let out an exasperated growl as I turned down random alleyways and made turn after turn until I was utterly lost. I turned to Esme only to see that she was no longer with me. I came to a stop, looking around the dark, eerie street. Something felt off. Perhaps it was my fear of being by myself in a strange city. I almost felt like crying. I was so overwhelmed and defeated. I wish I hadn't left Arden. I could have been snuggled up in my bed in my home right now. I walked quietly down the deserted street, feeling uncertain and afraid. I didn't know what to do now, perhaps hide a while and try to go back to the entrance. I only hoped Esmeralda had made it back to the forest. I heard footsteps other than mine, and I came to an abrupt stop, fear sinking into my bones. There was more than one person. "It's dangerous to wander by yourself, little one," a voice said, and I whirled around to meet the eyes of a few vampires. I didn't take the time to count how many there were as I took off running down the street. I heard their laughter follow me as I ran blindly into the dark. There were maybe 5 or 6, and I was their prey. I ran straight into the arms of the enemy, my body bouncing off and rolling on the cold ground. "Should have gone to Specsavers," he chuckled as the rest of his nest surrounded me. 6 vampires in total. I counted the faces, focused on me. "Come on, I'm not half as tasty as I look," I tried to reason as the collar pulled me up. Blood-red eyes glared back into mine. "I beg to differ, love." I shot my leg out, taking him by surprise, and he dropped me back onto the ground. An earth-shattering growl resonated through the air, and I slowly raised my eyes to meet livid, bright gold ones. The scent of cinnamon and forest drifted over to me, and I realized that it was Isaiah. I sighed in relief, though it would make things much more complicated. The vampires stood stiffly before the man waved his hand, and another 2 vampires came into view. I was beginning to realize the odds were not in his favor. 8 against 1. He lunged forward and took the first vampire by surprise as he sank his teeth into its neck. The rest of the vampires reacted quickly and jumped as Isaiah managed to avoid them the first time, but I heard a sickening crack as his leg was snapped. He let out a low wheeze and growled in pain. "Stop!" I cried, crawling forward slowly. He tried to get to me, but another vampire kicked him in the ribs, and I heard a definite crack as he fell to the ground. Tears fell down my cheeks now as the vampires pulled me back. "Finish it." The man growled, and 4 vampires started to attack him until he stopped breathing brutally. I fell to the ground, hyperventilating and crying as I watched his mangled body. I saw his life begin to leave his body. The idiot who rushed into impossible odds to save me. I mourned the loss of a mate I never had the chance to meet. "Shut up," I heard one of them hiss, then laughter mocking my grief. "Let her mourn. She'll soon follow," the man said slowly and bitterly, and he allowed me to crawl over to Isaiah's body. I threw myself beside him, my tears freely falling on his face as I held his face between my hands. He stared at me, his eyes barely open. "I'm so sorry, Aurelia," he whispered before coughing, sputtering up blood. I tried to save you," he stuttered, and I decided in that moment. This world might not be as sheltered as Arden, but it possesses beauty and magic. I saw it in the city lights and wide, bright smiles of children singing. I saw it in the city that stretched out in front of me from the top of the Ferris wheel, and I saw it in the eyes of my dying mate. The spark of love and compassion was dying out as he closed his eyes. "No," I choked, holding my mate's cold face in my numbing hands. Anger and bitterness built up in my body until it was almost oozing out, and I decided I would change the course of fate. I would not let him die. Nymphs have remarkable healing powers. I had practiced in Arden on a fallen bird with a broken wing, on Esmeralda when she fell from a tree and fractured her arm. I knew I could save his life. I focused on all the energy bubbling up inside my soul, and I gathered it in the palms of my hand. I heard the gasps and disbelief of the vampires behind me as a green glow emanated from my hands, and I focused it on his chest, feeling his body begin to patch itself up beneath my touch. I could feel the cells that made his body come together and repair, breathing in the magic that I poured into his body until he was patched up again. I fell back, cold and trembling. "Well," the vampire behind me said, his voice laced with admiration and disbelief. "This is a game changer." I was grabbed from behind and pulled from Isaiah's unconscious body, down the cold street, away from the mate who lay cold and unmoving but alive. He was alive. Chapter 7. Isaiah's POV. The doors to my office slammed loudly, bouncing through the empty hallway, an echo of my misery and guilt. Misery because the same day that I found my mate, I lost her. Guilt because I let those creatures take her. The only thing keeping me hanging on by a thread was the fact that I hadn't felt the bond break. Even if it had just been formed, I knew I would feel great pain if she had been killed. Her bright green eyes filled with tears and fear as she leaned over my crumbled body haunted me. I smashed my fist into the closest wall, a strong desire to break and wreak havoc on everything around me, to have something to unleash my anger upon. "That's the 7th hole you've punched in 4 days," came Alistair's sarcastic voice as he sat up. He had been waiting for me. He put his hands in his pockets, his eyes finding mine under the dimming light of day. "You'll find her, Isaiah. They're keeping her alive." I suddenly had the urge to hit something again. They're keeping her alive because of what she can do. But I have no idea what kind of pain and suffering she's enduring. All because I failed to save her, I spat, bitterness lacing my words. Alistair didn't react in the slightest. "You were against 8 vampires at once and still in shock from finding our Luna. It's a miracle you weren't killed, and we owe that to her. But I have to ask, Isaiah, what exactly is she?" I raised an eyebrow, rifling through loose papers on my desk that offered me nothing. No leads, nothing to follow, nowhere to go. Only this empty and hollow feeling. "She's my mate, and that's all there is to it," I said sharply. "No ordinary person has those kinds of healing abilities. Furthermore, she had the scent of a human, but sweeter. There was something off-putting about it considering all that's happened." I sighed heavily, feeling annoyed and defeated. "I don't know, Alistair. I plan to speak to my father today sometime. Perhaps he'll have some idea about what happened." Just then, the door opened and the man in question stepped into the room. Former Alpha Jeremy stood stiffly in the doorway, his dark eyes capturing the entire room. His eyes took in the office that he hadn't seen in 4 years. When I took over, there were rarely problems I couldn't handle on my own, and I was quick to take the reins. However, I sought his guidance and knowledge on this. "Son," he said as he embraced me wholeheartedly. I could only thank the gods that my mother had not accompanied him when I was about to deliver the news. He walked to the window, noticing the holes in the wall from my anger. "I heard about the vampire attack. 2 wolves were injured, and 6 humans are dead." "Father," I trailed off, unable to gauge his emotions. "It wasn't your fault, Isaiah. With leadership come those who will question it and pose a threat. You were there to protect the humans, and you did what you could. It was a tragedy, one that requires you to up your security. But take it with a grain of salt and learn from it. If the problem persists, then perhaps you may have to launch an attack with the aid of some of the subpacks." "It's not the attack, Father," I said quietly, which seemed to catch his attention as he turned to me, motioning for me to continue. "I found my mate last night." He stilled, his eyes growing hard. He could tell by the fact that she was not with me that something was wrong. "She ran away, and I chased her to where we were attacked by a group of vampires. They overpowered me, and I was within seconds of death." He looked up suddenly, his eyes unreadable. "Then I don't know what she did. She put her hands over me, and I saw this green glow emit from her hands, and then she healed me." My father's brow creased in thought as he turned to the window, seemingly deep in contemplation. "Alistair, were you around her?" "Yes, sir," Alistair responded, and my father nodded in understanding. "Describe her to me." Alistair let out a nervous chuckle as confusion washed over me. "With all due respect, sir, but would the Alpha not be better suited to this?" He waved his hand in dismissal. "No, the fact that she's his mate will warp the reality of his experience. I need to know what you thought. What did she look like? Was there anything odd about her?" Alistair coughed nervously. "Well, sir, the best way I could describe her appearance is haunting. You can't deny her beauty, but it's almost unearthly. She had the scent of a human, but more alluring and captivating." I let out a deep growl as he grinned sheepishly at me. My father gave me the look I recognized from when I was a kid, the one that said he had just realized something important. "Could it be possible?" he whispered, and I looked up at him in confusion and curiosity. "I think you may have encountered a forest nymph." I woke up with silk sheets wrapped around my petite frame. Groggily, I sat up and wiped the sleep from my eyes as I surveyed the large room. The sheets were a dark mauve, along with the curtains. I put my bare feet on the white carpet as fear overtook my body. Where was I? The memories of last night came flooding back, and just like that, terror seized me. I could feel the breath leave my body as I struggled to get oxygen into my lungs. After a few minutes, I began to calm down, trying to make sense of the situation. I wasn't in a dark and grimy cell. I was in a large and lavish room, almost like a guest. I looked around the room once more, checking to see if the door was left open. It was locked, so I checked the windows. They were locked as well. I wanted to sigh in frustration when the door opened, and a young girl came in slowly, carrying a tray of food. Where am I? I croaked out, and she didn't respond until I stood next to her and laid a hand on her shoulder. Please. She saw my bright, terror-filled eyes, brimming with desperation and hope, and sighed deeply. Vampires took you. You're just outside of South Dakota, she whispered numbly. What do they want with me? She placed the tray on the table and stumbled back. I don't know, I'm only the help. I raised an eyebrow. Do they mean to harm me? Why am I not in a cell? She fell quiet, her eyes falling on the carpeted floor in debate. She was debating whether to tell me. This, she motioned towards the wide room, does not mean safety. You would have been better off in the cells. You would have stood a chance, she said stiffly before turning to leave. Fear ran through my body like a hot, searing knife, tearing through me as I registered her words. What does that mean? I whispered, and she turned for a final time, her eyes hard and cold. It means you've been claimed by one of them. Chapter 8. I sat in silence for another hour, the strange girl's words resonating through my mind again and again. Claimed. The word ignited two emotions, fear and anger. I was afraid. I was miles from home and what I considered familiar in a mansion of vampires. I was scared out of my wits. But I was also spiteful and angry, and I tried to clutch onto that feeling as much as I could, as I knew that was the only thing that would pull me through this experience, if I did manage to survive in the first place. Claimed. As if I were an animal, someone to be owned. It disgusted me. The door swung open, and the same girl from earlier stood in the doorway stiffly, nodding her head in greeting. Her mousy blonde hair fell in ringlets down her shoulders. She wore a yellow sundress that bared her shoulders. But it also exposed her bite marks. Some were older, a fading white or pink, while others were an ugly and inflamed red that stood out against her pale porcelain skin. She saw me staring, but said nothing. He's waiting for you, she said timidly, and I sat up, my hands involuntarily forming fists as dread set in. Who? She threw me a bored look, as if she'd discussed this 1,000 times. Master Kevin. Again, my anger spiked. Master? She threw me a sharp look, her eyes glinting dangerously in the light. You'd be careful not to take that tone with him. Kevin is one of the kinder ones. You're lucky. I stood abruptly, my eyes level with hers. Anyone that kidnaps young victims, claims them, and then feeds on them is not kind. Her eyes widened for a split second, taken by surprise as she stumbled back before an undeniable hardness settled in. She offered me a brisk and humorless laugh. They'll break your spirit, she spat bitterly, and I raised an eyebrow, staring her down. You're terrified of them. You're crazy not to be, she hissed back, panic and desperation lacing her words. Maybe I am. I shrugged, walking past her and out the door. We walked in silence through the lavish hallways. They were filled with large pictures and fluorescent ceiling lights and shone too brightly. Eventually, we reached a large dining room where a table was filled with people. That'll do, Miranda. You're dismissed, a man said, standing up to greet us. He flashed me a crude smile, his eyes wild and alight with a giddy glee. Miranda turned and left without looking back. I almost wanted to follow her. Hello, love. My name is Kevin. It's very nice to officially meet you. He took my hand between his and placed a tender kiss on it. I felt sick to my stomach. Anger bubbled up inside me, but I pushed it down. Raging and spitting out curses at people who could overpower me in seconds would not profit me. I smiled, letting out a nervous laugh, and he soaked up my reaction, turning to the group of vampires with a triumphant smile. I picked a docile one. A lucky find. I wish I could say the same for mine, a vampire with sky-blue eyes and coal-black hair that fell in curls around his shoulders announced. My eyes fell on the bruised and scared-looking girl sitting by his side, and I wanted to grab his steak knife and stab him through the throat. Where am I? I tested, my voice wavering, and Kevin turned to me again, a relaxed smile stretching across his lips. Why, my love, you're home. My smile faltered for half a second. Oh, dear God. I don't believe I understand, I said timidly, and his eyes darkened. I've claimed you. You're mine now. You do as I say, and you don't question my authority. If you do as I ask, you'll be rewarded. I'll try to be as compassionate and understanding as I can in return. I don't like when people test my patience. I stilled, my heartbeat picking up. This was going exactly as I had planned. I nodded quietly. I understand. He led me over to the table, where 3 other people sat. The man from earlier with the scared girl by his side. This is Lila and Darian. He motioned towards the 2, and Darian offered me a smile that sent shivers down my spine. It's a pleasure. A silence fell before he slammed his fist down on the table, and the head of the young girl snapped up. We greet our guests, Lila, he spat, yanking her up. Her terrified eyes met mine across the table as she mumbled a greeting. And these are the twins, Melina and Shiloh, he said, motioning towards the 2 other females sitting at the table. Both had long black hair and sharp, cat-like eyes. Hello, Shiloh greeted, and Melina offered a curt nod. Silence fell on the room as a bowl of soup was placed in front of me by a helper. I stared down at the red liquid. Tomato soup, don't worry, love, Kevin said, and I looked up, nodding as I took a spoon. Not eating would get me nowhere. My eyes focused on the couple across from me again, and I couldn't help but notice how uneasy the atmosphere felt. His hand was resting on her arm, gripping it tightly enough to bruise. She didn't whimper, but stared stoically ahead without any trace of emotion on her face. Her wild red curls fell, covering pieces of her face, but I could easily see that she was covered in bruises. Dark, angry welts that stood out clearly against her white skin. The bruises were a heavy purple, some black and green. Darian moved his hand lower to grab her wrist, and she turned, glaring at him with as much fury and hatred as could be kept in one person's body without them imploding. He said nothing in response to her reaction, but I could tell by his eyes, by the way a slight satisfied grin stretched across his lips, that he derived some joy from her pain. He found her anger amusing. He saw her as nothing more than a toy. Pretty, isn't she? He drawled across the table to me as he stroked his finger across her skin, almost affectionately. Shiloh turned her cold eyes towards them. She would be prettier without all the bruises tainting her skin, no? It's such a shame to see them like that. She sighed, and Darian offered a crude smile, his snake-like eyes finding mine once again, and I could hear the venom in his voice before he spoke. I was cautious to keep an expressionless face as he said the following line, as I knew he was patiently waiting for my reaction, feeding off of it even. His lips twisted up into a sick smile. I view it quite differently, Shiloh. She's like my personal human canvas. I can paint on bruises and blood as I like. She's too helpless to stop me. I think she even enjoys the attention. She's becoming a masterpiece with every strike. Lila began shaking back and forth, and I saw a rage I'd never seen enter her eyes. I almost wanted to leave the table. I could sense something bad was about to happen. Stop fucking twitching, Darian spat as Lila stilled in her seat, her wild red hair falling tangled around her shoulders. Then she moved quickly, almost quicker than I could catch, as she grabbed the steak knife and plunged it into the side of Darian's neck. Chapter 9. My breath hitched, failing to supply oxygen to my lungs as my eyes registered the pure anger radiating off of Darian. His eyes were dark and livid as he stilled, becoming very silent. Lila shot up from the seat and dashed across the room to the main foyer. I followed her quietly and tensely, my anxiety spiking at the wild look in her eyes as she ran. Your human needs to be taught manners. Cavan laughed as he swung his arm around my shoulder. Like my docile little one. I wanted to shrug it off and spit out insults, but I just sat there, looking dazed and afraid. Darian stood slowly before walking just as slowly into the foyer. From where I sat, I could hear the poor girl fumble with the door in her desperate attempt to flee. Screams ensued, echoing through the room and vibrating through the floor. Such a dramatic, Shiloh sighed, picking at the meat on her plate. Come, Cavan said, and I left my half-eaten soup as I stood stiffly. He grabbed my hand and began to pull me along. We walked down the empty hallways I had come through earlier until he stopped outside of a door and stepped inside, pulling me in after him. I had been waiting for the Inquisition and had been planning which lies sounded most believable all morning. I had to be ready for any questions he fired at me. I guessed he brought me to an empty study for fear that we'd be overheard. He turned slowly, a grin spreading across his face to mask the shadow of curiosity that I didn't miss. So, what are you? Cavan asked curtly, and I cocked my head to the side. What do you think? He hummed. I'll make something very clear, Aurelia. I just saw you bring a wolf back from the brink of death. It looked like magic, yet you're not a witch because those kinds of healing powers don't exist. You're in a predicament because if you were just a human, you'd be no different than all the others that have passed through here and have never left. Humans are not dealt good cards among my kind. However, Aurelia, if you were something other than a normal human, it would entitle you to a security and protection that would highly profit you. I hummed in response. And if I don't tell you? His eyes grew hard, losing the playfulness that they had held earlier. He was on me in seconds, his hot breath fanning across my face as he glared down at my small frame. Maybe I've given you the wrong impression, Aurelia, but I'm not one to be taken lightly. If I do not like those that I claim, they suffer. You wouldn't like to be on the receiving end of that kind of treatment, no. I suppose not, I agreed, and his nostrils flared in anger as he slammed his hand down on the table. Damn it, I'm getting nowhere with you. I'm not sure what I am. I've always had these capabilities, but I was hidden away for exactly that reason. His eyes brightened as he took in the information. Interesting, he murmured. Where did you hide? In that little town. I nodded. Yes. He raised an eyebrow at my story, leaning across the desk and placing his face in his hands in mock interest. Aurelia, he drawled out. Are you telling me the truth? I paled. What reason would I have to lie? He let out a brief laugh. Very well, what are the names of your parents? I stilled, looking up at him in confusion, like a deer in the headlights. Why? So I can cross-reference your information, love. I wanted to curse in that moment. Curse it all to hell. As nymphs, we weren't born with a last name, and I was coming up blank for a fake family that he couldn't know I didn't have. Suddenly, the taste of those crepes in my mouth came back to me, and I recalled the name on the stall. Anna Cambridge's Local Crepes. Anna Cambridge, I said slowly. She's a baker, married to Thomas Cambridge. I didn't know who Thomas was. He narrowed his eyes at me. I'm going to double-check the information I'm receiving, Aurelia. Are you even from that village? I've been around it a few times to scout, and I didn't see or smell you. I lifted my nose. Everything I'm telling you is the truth. He nodded slowly, waving a hand. You're dismissed. You should go help Lila clean herself up after the stunt she pulled today. She's in the room across from yours. I left the room quickly. Cautiously, I pushed the door open to Lila's room. It was similar to mine, large and styled lavishly and utterly ironic. Lila, I called out, unsure of what to do. The bathroom door opened, and she cautiously poked her head out, staring at me skeptically as she motioned towards the door. Ever heard of knocking? I looked back, realizing that was customary in this world. However, coming from Arden, I wasn't aware of it. Oh, forgive me. She rolled her eyes as she sat on the bed, carrying a first aid box with her. It was evident to see that she had been hurt. Her werewolf genes were already starting to heal her, though. But I could pick out the new injuries that had been added. I felt my heart go out to her as she winced when she moved towards the bed. I approached her cautiously, and her hard eyes landed on me, stopping me in my tracks. Why are you here? I don't need your help. I've been patching myself up for weeks, and if it's friendship you're interested in, we obviously don't share the same mentality or ambitions. I shrugged. What makes you say that? She scoffed. The way you act, as if you weren't kidnapped and forced into coming here, like a docile little girl. My anger spiked at her rudeness, and I held back my sharp tongue but made my intent very clear. I'm far from docile. But at least I've the common sense to realize that I've a better chance of escaping if I earn their trust. Little did she know nymphs could be manipulative and coercive. It was ingrained in us. She gave me a deadpan look. Earn the trust of vampires? Or at least not be so hurt that I can barely walk. Her eyes grew cold and unforgiving, and I realized I'd gone too far. It was in that moment that I discovered this world had brought out a different side of me, a side that stayed hidden and waiting to be triggered in the shelter of Arden. You've been here for a day. Let's not forget that you have Cavan. Cavan and Darian are in every way different. I can't avoid pain with Darian, and you're stupider than you look if you think you'll be unharmed here. I sighed deeply. Look, I don't want to fight with the only potential friend I might make here on the first day. You and I are in the same boat. We both want to leave as quickly as possible. Turning on each other is possibly the stupidest thing we could do. She cocked an eyebrow, a slow smile stretching across her face. Okay, maybe you do have a little bit of sense. You're right, driving you away would only benefit him. I felt relief sink in as she patted the empty spot on her bed and started bandaging her arms. I stared at her uncertainly. I could heal her, but I didn't want to reveal anything about that side of myself when I couldn't trust her. So what and who do you know so far? She asked, and I thought back to this morning. I've met Cavan, Darian, and the twins. She nodded. Try and undermine Cavan. Win his trust any way you can. He's the kindest out of all the others. The twins are okay unless you get on their bad side, and then Darian is just plain evil. Stay clear of him. You haven't met the rest of us. She motioned towards her and me. Other than the servants, there are 3 more that are claimed. Ellie and Simeon, siblings that are claimed by the twins, and you haven't met Elisa, who was claimed by Polly 2 years ago. They're both away for a few days. I nodded slowly. I met someone this morning, a girl in a sundress. She looked away. That's Miranda. She does odd jobs. She's okay, but a bit weird. She was silent for a second. Don't let on to the others that you have any intention to escape. The longer you're here, the more brainwashed you become. You can't trust that it won't get to the wrong ears. I nodded slowly, and she gave me a small smile, which I returned. So, we need to form a plan to get the bloody hell out of here. Chapter 10. Esmeralda and Finley stood, unsure what to do. They had been living with the wolves for the past 24 hours, both refusing to return without Aurelia. The Alpha seemed sensible enough and treated them with respect, setting them up in lavish rooms in the pack house. Esmeralda was only too thankful that they hadn't been placed in a cell and treated with hostility. The door opened, the large, heavy oak groaning in protest as the old wood slid over the marred wooden floors. Isaiah stepped into the room, and Esmeralda couldn't help but notice the bags under his eyes. He nodded at the 2 strangers in his office. His beta followed him in as he quietly shut the door. I'm sorry for calling you here, he said stiffly as he walked around to the front of the cluttered desk, running his hand through his wild curls. I think it's time we had a talk. Esmeralda stayed silent while Finley was the one who stood up and voiced his thoughts. She was still gauging the Alpha, trying to suss out his personality and traits. Have you found her? Or any leads? The Alpha gave him a tired, defeated look, but beneath it lay an underlying anger. No, his answer was abrupt and stark, causing Finley to grow silent. Esmeralda could sense that Aurelia was still alive. Call it intuition or something more substantial that connected them, she just knew. Even if you do find her, Esmeralda started, what do you plan to do with her? I don't understand the weird fascination you have with her. Truth be told, Esmeralda knew very little about mates. She knew it was some bond formed among werewolves, but was confused about how Aurelia had been pulled into it. She's my mate. Esmeralda looked up at him blankly. He sighed slowly. Do you have any idea what that is? I have a small grasp on it, but I don't fully comprehend it. Isaiah nodded, contemplating in his head how to explain this to someone. A mate bond is sacred to my kind. It's a bond formed between a wolf and their chosen mate, chosen for them by the moon goddess. Aurelia is my mate, the other half of my soul. Without her, I'll eventually die. Without her, I feel empty and incomplete, and that won't fade until I find her. Esmeralda took in the information before scoffing. And you've decided that this gives you some kind of ownership of her? Isaiah's eyes grew hard. I never aspired to own her. I view her as my equal. All I plan to do is keep her protected. If you've never felt the mate bond, you wouldn't understand what it is. To part with me would be damaging to her also now that we've met. Esmeralda put her hand up. This sounds like absolute bullshit. Would you rather she died? Isaiah snapped, his voice laced with venom and anger that pierced through the room. Logically, it probably would not kill her to leave him as it would do to him, but it would have a permanent effect. But the mere thought of her leaving him caused him such inexplicable pain that it caused him to lash out and be irrational. I know it's a little difficult to understand, Esmeralda, but he speaks the truth. The mate bond is remarkable. I think you should consider that being with him would benefit her more than being without him. Isaiah turned his eyes on the male, narrowing in confusion and skepticism. The way he spoke of the bond was almost as if he had experience with it. Finley, in turn, grinned at the alpha. I suppose I might mention that I'm mated to one of your pack members. That's why I'm here, to look for her. She disappeared 2 weeks ago. But now everything is all over the place with Aurelia going missing also. Isaiah raised an eyebrow. You're mated to which member of my pack? Finley looked straight ahead, his bright eyes locking with the dark gray of the alphas. Lila. I had pretty much determined with Lila's help that our chances of escaping were pretty slim. Not that security was tight, but even if we managed to escape, traveling on foot wouldn't be long before we were caught. The vampires were very observant, too. They were used to humans trying to sneak away. It's more so that we don't get any privacy or chance to escape, rather than very strict security. We have a set routine. Breakfast is at 9, and we spend that hour with our master. After, we're to retire to our rooms until 1, when we're retrieved for lunch. The only time we're permitted to be out of our rooms and are allowed to mingle is between 5 and 6 in the common room, where the vampires can keep an eye on us. After dinner, we're either taken away by our masters or sent back to our rooms. So most of my time was spent learning every nook and cranny of the room, down to the little cracks in the wall behind the large cupboard. I sighed deeply, falling back on the bed. It was my 3rd day here, and I hadn't thought of anything. I'd been trying to formulate plans in my head, but I hadn't gathered enough information to have anything substantial to form a plan around. Kevin seemed okay for the time being, and I was fully aware that it wouldn't last forever, and I would have to try to escape before he decided I was settled in. I had decided that if I could get a message to Isaiah, I would. I'd much rather be in his arms right now. I felt a shiver of anticipation run down my spine as I remembered his dark, stormy eyes and the way my heart sped up when I was around him. Suddenly, I felt giddy. In Arden, I'd never experienced those kinds of feelings except in the books I'd gotten from the human world. Now that I had an experience, it both excited and terrified me. I couldn't resist that my heart yearned for Isaiah, a man I'd only met, and that scared me tremendously. But I wanted to see where that feeling would bring me. If the mate bond was as magical and amazing as it's supposed to be, should I really be running from it? But at the same time, I had so many questions. What if he were as insanely possessive as the books claimed? I couldn't possibly put up with someone who was that overbearing in my life. Nymphs are creatures of freedom. That kind of reign on my life would suffocate me. And I had to realize that I'd never be able to return to Arden or see my father. My old life would be left in the dust. I remember the wild fields of heather and lavender as I basked in the summer sun with Esmeralda and Finley, and suddenly I was hit by a wave of nostalgia. I missed home. I missed the things that brought me warmth and familiarity. I forgot my father's blueberry pancakes and Fern helping us wrap tinsel around our Christmas tree and Alina dropping by with almond tarts. I missed the little pigeon who would sit on my window every morning, and I'd tell him about my mornings as he tweeted back in consideration. Some nymphs were blessed with the power to speak to animals, not all, but it was something I inherited from my mother. Esmeralda was always so jealous when I talked to the wild doves in the forests and asked them where the fresh berries grew. I smiled tenderly, missing those memories more than anything in the world. Suddenly, an idea struck me. Could I not get a bird to deliver a note? If I managed to get outside and get close enough to one to carry it. It was still risky though. It might not make it to Isaiah's territory, and I wasn't sure I even knew where to tell it to fly. How did I get to Isaiah's territory from here? The door opened softly, and Lila stuck her head in. It's 6. Over the last 3 days, I have gotten to know Lila a bit better too. I hadn't asked her much as I didn't want her to feel as if I was snooping. But I needed to know if she knew where the town was. Lila, do you know where the Littlewood pack is situated? Her eyes narrowed, turning hard, and I felt I might have hit a sore spot. Could she have possibly come from that pack? Why? She asked slowly, and I looked up. I have an idea. I know a way to get a message there. The alpha of the pack will come to retrieve us. She raised an eyebrow skeptically. And why exactly would the alpha of my pack come to save you? I grinned sheepishly at her. I mated to him. Her eyes almost popped from their sockets, and immediately she was bowing. Luna, my deepest apologies. I was unaware. I stood quickly. Please don't treat me any differently. Anyway, I know how to get them a note. I just need to get outside. She nodded slowly. Not impossible, but what exactly do you plan to do? I thought for a second. Did I want to trust her with my secret? No. I couldn't trust her yet. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. She eyed me skeptically. Fine, but only because I'm desperate. I've a mate I want to get back to soon. I'm afraid he's going to do something stupid like come to find me. Finley crossed my mind, and I laughed it off. What's his name? But then she completely shocked me. Finley. Could it be? What were the chances? If she were the girl Finley was talking about, there was a fair chance that she already knew about the existence of nymphs, because Finley couldn't keep his mouth shut. If that were the case, it would completely change the dynamics of the situation. I might not trust her, but I trusted fate and, most importantly, I trusted Finley. It might be a naive outlook, but sometimes you have to play into fate's hands and let the universe do its job. Now I just had to suss out the situation. Is Finley a werewolf in the pack? She looked up surprised. No, he's a human. I raised an eyebrow, wanting to laugh. I still had an inkling of a doubt, but I had a gut feeling that this was the same Finley I knew. Lila, I said quietly, in a whisper, and I motioned for her to close the door. She narrowed her eyes at me skeptically. Did Finley come from the forest? Her eyes widened as she struggled to find the words. From a little city called Arden. She finished as realization dawned on her face, and she went as white as a sheet. Oh my God. You're one of them. No, holy shit. You're Aurelia. Oh Jesus. You're one of his best friends. What the bloody hell are you doing here? I smiled softly, relief flooding my body. Weirdly enough, knowing that Lila knows Finley made me feel more grounded and confident. It's a long story. Chapter 11. I spoke with Lila last night, and she told me she met Finley during one of his visits to the city. She knew straight away that he was her mate and tried to speak to him repeatedly. He'd always ignore me, never paid me the time of day. It used to irritate me so much. She laughed as her eyes filled with memories, a sad, fleeting smile crossing her lips. Then he disappeared for a month. It was absolute hell. I was terrified I'd never see him again. I walked the route I met him daily, hoping to see his familiar face, and would be flooded with disappointment every time I didn't see him. She paused, taking a breath. Then one day, as I was walking along the same road, I saw him again. He ignored me similar to the last time, and even got quite snappy when I followed him into the village, but I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't chance losing him again. I was so caught up that I ended up falling over a basket left on the footpath and twisting my ankle. Instead of walking away, he sighed overdramatically and reluctantly agreed to carry me back to my house, where I managed to convince him to watch a movie with me. The rest is history. I sighed deeply, invested in the romance of how they met. That sounds so romantic. She giggled lowly. Please. That's nothing compared to how you met Isaiah. I rolled my eyes. In the middle of a vampire attack, and then I ran away. I scowled, and she laughed, her eyes light and airy compared to the furious deep blue I had seen on the first day. Since we both figured out how we were connected, there was something of an unspoken trust between us. She seemed to trust me fully, and had developed a new respect as her Luna, which unnerved me to say the least. Our alpha has been waiting a long time. I'm glad it's someone like you, she said quietly, her legs dangling off the side of the bed. I went silent before hesitantly asking, could you tell me a little about him? She leaned back on the silk covers, humming in response. How would I describe him? First of all, he's a very powerful and respected leader, as he gained the power to lead one of the main 10 packs in the country. He trained relentlessly and is unbeaten in combat in both wolf and human form. She sat up slightly, animating her story. He took over from his father at the age of 18, which is remarkably young as alphas normally take over well into their late 20s. Therefore, when he took over, he was challenged by people who equated his age to a lack of power and ability. However, he was very quick to prove his capabilities as a leader and as a fighter. I stayed silent as she spoke proudly of her alpha. I couldn't lie. The picture painted of Isaiah was one that intimidated me. I was by no means powerful, and as a nymph, I also didn't have a very violent nature. Was he disappointed that I wasn't a wolf? That I wasn't raised with the same virtues and beliefs? Almost sensing my unease, Lila said, but he's also just a man who's been without his mate for 4 years. He's a fearless and sometimes ruthless leader if need be, but he's also caring and compassionate to the ones he cares about. I nodded, trying to get a grasp on the information. We sat in silence for a few moments before the door was silently swung open by Kevin, who raised a single eyebrow. It's time to go back to your room, love, he said, and I nodded slowly, getting to my feet. He led me out of the room and into mine. I turned slowly, letting a slow smile cross my lips, and he raised an eyebrow. What is it? I was just wondering if I could go outside tomorrow. I haven't been outside in a few days. He looked away, deep in thought as he contemplated it before shrugging. Sure. What's the worst that could happen? I'll accompany you tomorrow morning. I wanted to hop up and down as the words registered. If I got outside, I could easily ask one of the birds to take a note to Isaiah. Kevin stilled, sensing my excitement. You're not planning to try and run away, are you? He asked skeptically, and I quickly shook my head. No, I'm just excited to see the gardens, I lied, and he nodded slowly before stopping again and leaning in towards me. I flinched backwards, but his face was beside mine in mere seconds. I could feel his hot breath fan my face as my body wanted to recoil in discomfort. Wear something pretty for me, he whispered, and I could barely form a coherent thought as a wave of fear hit me. I nodded meekly, and he pulled back, grinning. He turned and left, and I could still feel his breath on my face. I felt a cold chill run through my body, and suddenly, I felt exhausted. The mental fatigue was catching up to me physically, and I just wanted to cry. I couldn't gather the energy to fight off the negative thoughts, so I let them overwhelm me. Everything was just too overwhelming and different. Isaiah was different, too, but in a good way, in a way that lit up my soul and made me feel giddy, panicked, and confused. But this made me feel stripped back and vulnerable to the point that I just cried. Silent tears ran down my face as I longed for home, or even Esmeralda and Finley. I longed for safety, a feeling I had taken for granted until it was stolen from me. I lay back on the soft velvet sheets silently, staring up at the dark ceiling as silent tears ran down my cheeks. I didn't know what I wanted. Did I like Isaiah or Arden? Did I enjoy the excitement and love of the mate bond, or did I want home? Chapter 12. It wasn't too hard to acquire a pen and paper, surprisingly enough. We were permitted to spend our free time between 5 and 6 in the library if we wanted. I had already scoured it for a pen and paper, and thankfully, I managed to find both. So as soon as I woke, I wrote the note I hoped would reach Isaiah. Firstly, I told him where I was, based on Lila's sense of direction and what we'd both managed to suss out in the time we'd been here, and said I was okay for now. I was going to leave it at that, but after staring at it for a few minutes, I picked up the pen and added a final line. I sighed, folding the little piece of paper and slipping it into the pocket of my jumper. The clothes of the human world were much warmer and easier to move in. It had taken some time to grow accustomed to them, but I was coming to love the soft, oversized sweaters and the varied textures and materials in their clothes. In Arden, all of our clothes were handmade from loose fabric. The elders were very hesitant to adopt any of the outside world's habits. The little shop of books and antiques Finley collected was the only window into the outside world we were allowed. I waited and read for a while until my door was unlocked for breakfast. I couldn't concentrate on the page, however, I was filled with nerves and excitement. Today would determine how everything turned out. I had to try and be discreet enough that Kevin didn't see me slip the bird the note. The door opened and Miranda stepped in, nodding in greeting. Breakfast will be served in a few minutes. You can make your way down now. I nodded meekly and pushed myself up off the bed, leaving the half-open book behind me. Just as we moved to go, a loud crash echoed from above us, followed by shouts and screaming. I jumped in response as Miranda did the same, and at the same time, the note inside my pocket fell out onto the ground. Panic filled my eyes, and she noticed as hers narrowed with suspicion. She bent down and grabbed it before I could react. Her eyes found mine once more, hard and unforgiving. Idiot. How did you hope to deliver this? Do you have a vendetta against yourself? This is suicide. Panic filled my chest, and I wanted to cry and scream at the same time. Panic filled every cell in my body at once, and I began to tremble. My eyes filled with desperation, and she stared back at me with fear and disbelief. Please, Miranda. I can deliver it. Believe me, I know a way that will work. This is our way out. I know you've been stuck here for who knows how long, but it's not right. The way of life here is horrible. This might be the only chance at escape we have. Her eyes filled with a fire as she spoke. I've been here for 5 years. My hope began to fade, but she surprised me as she said, but I've never given up on the hope of a better life. I've a family I want to return to. A little sister called Mirabelle, a mom, and a dad. I have a life. Then help me, I whispered in desperation. All you have to do is give it back and pretend you knew nothing. Nothing will happen to you even if I'm discovered. She didn't blink as she asked, how do you plan to deliver it? I choked on my words as I thought of how to explain it. Birds, I muttered, and her eyes filled with confusion. Birds? I offered her a meek smile. I can communicate with the birds. I can ask them to carry this message. Is it a form of magic? She asked, and I nodded as that was easier to explain. She didn't seem to believe me fully, but was contemplating it, and finally, she nodded. And this Alpha? He'll help us. I nodded in assurance, and she finally sighed deeply. I'll help you. A relief like none other washed over me as I felt every bone in my body relax slightly. I expected her to hand me back the note, but she slipped it into her pocket. What are you doing? I sputtered, and she rolled her eyes. Kevin is very observant. It'll be difficult to get this past him without him noticing, and if you're the type to jump at every little sound, you'll get found out. So how do you suggest we get out? I asked, and her eyes lit up with humor. You'll see. Breakfast was quiet. I had been here for a week now, and Kevin hadn't done anything to me. I knew my time was running out as he had been exceptionally touchy lately, using every excuse he could to brush against me or send me dazzling smiles. In the back of my mind, I considered, was this his game? Was he trying to be romantic? I didn't know whether to scoff or laugh at the idea. Lila sat quietly across the table, bruises littering her skin as she glared down at the table. Darian sat beside her, ignoring her quiet, making polite conversation. Are you beginning to settle in? He asked me, his lips twisting into a smirk. I felt annoyance build up within me as I sighed, nodding quietly. He grinned widely, leaning across the table towards me, his hand coming up to grab my chin. Interesting, he hasn't even had a taste yet. he said as Cavan knocked his hand from my chin, scowling in disapproval. "Keep your hands off what's not yours." Darian frowned, almost playfully, but I couldn't miss the devious and dark glint behind his dark eyes. He pouted. "But mine has become so dull." "You'll soon get rid of her," one of the twins said, sighing dramatically as Darian grimaced before grinning. "I swear, this guy and his mood swings. Shame." He shrugged as he turned to Lila once more, who only looked down at the table. "I suppose I'll get another few days?" Breakfast was served, and I ate solemnly. The bread felt stale in my mouth as Cavan and Darian chatted. The twins kept to themselves a lot, I noticed. Finally, after breakfast was finished, Cavan rose to his feet. "I'll take you out to see the gardens now." I regretted asking him now as I trudged out after him. We came to the front door, and, before I could blink, he had whipped me around and was checking my pockets. "I just wanted to be sure you weren't planning anything. You seemed a bit too excited to go see the gardens." He grinned, and for a mere moment, I felt utter panic take over my body before I realized I no longer had the note. I thanked the gods for Miranda, knowing that fate was working to help me escape. "Of course not." He laughed. "My obedient little doe." I felt shivers run down my spine as his words washed over me. He turned again, motioning towards the large doorway, and I stepped through, still a bit shaken that he had gone to the extent of checking if I was carrying anything. What did he suppose I could have done? Carry a weapon? I still wouldn't have gotten very far with that. I noticed the garden was filled with roses of every kind, and an array of colors lined the garden. There was a small path that I could follow, and I walked along contentedly as Cavan walked behind me quietly. "Are you settling in here?" he asked tenderly, and I couldn't help but find it even more unnerving when he tried to play himself off as kind. I knew he wasn't. I shrugged. "I suppose." He picked at one of the dark red roses, drawing a small spot of blood on his fingers. "I'll have to feed on you soon, you know." My blood ran cold at his words, and for once, I couldn't help the shock and fear that resonated through my words. What? He chuckled deeply at my unease, mistaking it for confusion. "That is the main reason you're here, love." I felt anger simmer up in my body, and the tiny trickle of things that had accumulated over the last few days imploded, leaving me livid and ready to explode. "Oh, you mean how you ripped me from my friends and my mate? How you completely stripped me of basic human rights and turned me into a puppet? How you decided you can determine what I do and who I talk to? Isn't that why I'm here, Cavan?" I spat, and I watched his eyes grow darker and angrier with every word I spoke, but I couldn't help it. At this point, my frustration was taking over, my frustration at being lost and trapped, at missing a man I'd only just met for reasons beyond my understanding, for my choices and decisions to be ripped away by vampires, for feeling so helpless. Why am I here, Cavan? When is the nice Cavan going to disappear, and then I will be subjected to the same abuse that Lila gets? You think I'm that naive, that dumb? You think I don't realize what's happening? Before I could react, a strong hand was wrapped around my throat, and oxygen stopped going into my lungs. I struggled for breath as I watched pure anger filter through his eyes. "You know, I'm really beginning to lose my patience with you," he said as I felt my vision begin to dot. I heaved and spluttered in a desperate attempt to supply oxygen to my lungs. "Let's try a different approach, huh?" He spat as he threw me against the ground. I rolled against the cobblestone, already feeling the bruises on my skin from the force used to throw me. I groaned, sitting up, but he was beside me in seconds, grabbing my petite frame and throwing me against the wall. I groaned in pain and felt it run through my body. "What are you, Aurelia? How did you heal him?" he roared as he approached me, and from a distance, I saw Darian round the corner and come into view. I was kicked again, harshly, and I felt one of my ribs break as a result. I let out a cry and scooted backwards in fear. "Cavan, calm down. You'll end up killing her," Darian said calmly, and Cavan whipped around, his stance defensive as he glared at Darian. "Get away now," he yelled as Darian held up his hands in surrender. I began to realize why Cavan was so calm all the time, because when he got angry, he got furious. He was a monster, completely out of control. His words began to slur with the pure anger he spat them out with, and I wanted to back away as I took in the wild look in his eyes, almost like a feral animal. "What did you say to him?" Darian asked me with hard eyes, and I struggled to kneel. "Stop talking to her. She's mine." Cavan roared, and he went to attack Darian, who slammed him into the wall, irritation showing on his face. Jesus, you must have really pissed him off. He glowered at me, and Cavan turned his head frantically between the two of us. His eyes were wide and frantic, full of an irrational and uncontrollable anger. "Stop stealing what's mine." Cavan shrieked as he grabbed Darian's arm and shoved him against the tree. Suddenly, I had an idea, and I looked up at Cavan. "He told me he wants to take me away from you." That was always his plan. "He wants to steal me from you," I told Cavan, and his eyes lit up with anger, and he attacked Darian again with a crazed amount of fury. I realized that this might be my only chance, and I rushed back into the mansion, desperate to find Miranda. Darian and Cavan were still outside as I ran through the halls, seeing her familiar figure as I grabbed her hand and began to tug her. "We have to do it now," I said, and one look at my desperate facial expression, and she was nodding in agreement. Chapter 13. I rushed along the narrow halls with Miranda. The hallways grew unfamiliar as we ran towards the back of the mansion. Finally, she reached a room and threw it open in a frenzy, and I quickly followed her in and shut the door. "Here's the note," she said, handing it to me as she ran over to the window. I was momentarily confused until she pushed the window open. I wanted to shout out in joy at that moment. "I've been here a lot longer, I get certain perks," she mumbled. She hurried to the package left open on her bed, with slices of bread. She quickly crumbled them in her hand and threw them out the window so that any birds near would be attracted to the crumbs and land on the roof next to the window. Her glassy, panicked eyes met mine as she tried to offer me a smile, but it ended up as more of a grimace. I guessed she'd picked up some bread when she was on kitchen duty. I had to owe it to her. She was smart. Soon, I heard the tweeting of birds as 2 or 3 landed on the roof, and I rushed over as they stared back in curiosity. "I need one of you to deliver a note for me. Can any of you do that?" I pleaded and watched as their tiny little eyes lit up in shock. Is it just me, or is that a human speaking to us? A bigger bird puffed out his chest and faced the smaller one. Indeed, she is. However, that is no human. It's a nymph. The bigger bird approached the window carefully until he was a footstep away from the windowsill. "I will deliver your message, NYMPYH. Where is it going?" I wanted to sigh in relief as I took the small note. I had crumbled it as small as it could get, and I saw that Miranda had attached a small piece of twine so that it would be easier to grasp onto. "Do you know where the Littlewood Werewolf pack is? Is it somewhere near the north?" His little eyes lit with understanding, and I almost wanted to cry with appreciation. He gave a slight nod. "Who will I deliver it to? The Alpha?" I nodded quickly and passed him the note, and he took it between his beak carefully. "I won't fail you," he said as he took off. My heart bubbled up with worry as I saw his little form fly off into the distance. I felt relief kick in until the shouts bounced off the walls and echoed down the hallway. "Aurelia." Every cell in my body froze as I registered the anger behind the voice, and I began to shake. "Oh no," I said as Miranda gave me a dry look. "What did you do?" she asked frantically as I rushed out into the hallways, leaving her without an answer. I didn't want to pull her into a problem I caused, so I ran straight towards the anger. I would face it straight on and hope for the best. But to my horror, Miranda had run down the hall after me. "Run away." I hissed, and she stubbornly shook her head. "We're in this together now. If I die, so be it. I'm sick of this life, and I refuse to live like this anymore." Her determined tone knocked the air out of me. I was so stunned, barely able to believe that the timid, scared girl I had met over a week ago could be the same girl running down the hallway after me. I suppose the rage and frustration at having her life ripped away were bubbling up in her, and something I couldn't see. Until now. I rounded a corner, seeing Darian and Cavan standing angrily in the middle of the hallway. Cavan was still fuming, and I could almost feel the anger radiating off him. However, I almost felt more uneasy at the dark and calculating look in Darian's eyes as he stood behind him. "Lila, come here," he said, and I was surprised to see Lila step out into the hallway, her long red locks falling around her shoulders as she stood beside Miranda as I took on a fighting stance. I felt a particular endearment towards the two who stood by my side. They could have easily walked away, but they chose to stay and fight alongside me. My heart filled with a thought, but my train of thought was cut short. "I will not allow you to harm my Luna," Lila sneered before shifting into her wolf form, a snarling ball of gray fury, and then she lunged towards Darian. Darian seemed startled at her newfound strength and determination as her small body collided with his and sent both of them tumbling to the floor. Her werewolf strength and my added healing abilities had given her the strength needed, and combined with her growing hatred and wild need for vengeance, it was almost a fair fight. Cavan's eyes narrowed in on me, and before I could react, his hand was around my throat. I was thrown towards the wall, my back colliding painfully with one of the picture frames hanging on the wall, and as I slid down the wall, so did the picture. Glass shattered as the frame hit the ground, and I quickly plucked up the most significant piece of glass I could see and held it out in front of me. Cavan let out a small laugh, his narrowed eyes darkening as he took small, almost condescending steps towards me. "It would have been so much easier if you'd stayed the docile little doe," he said, shaking his head, and I grimaced before launching myself towards him in an effort to catch him off guard. My plan backfired as he effortlessly kicked me into the wall, and the glass fell out of my hands. "Let's make this more interesting, no?" he asked as he walked towards Miranda, who stood in the middle of the hall, caught between two fights like a deer in the headlights. Her eyes widened with fear as we both registered his words. "I wonder how you'll feel knowing it's your fault she's dead." Cavan sneered as he grabbed onto his shoulder and sank his teeth into the side of his neck. I stilled, my breath failing to reach my lungs and my eyes failing to comprehend what I was seeing as Miranda shrieked, her arms flailing as she hit him in an effort to free herself of his grip. Her terrified eyes stared back at mine, and as I watched the life leave her eyes, it kick-started my body again, and I grabbed the shard of glass and stabbed Cavan through the thigh. He hissed, and Miranda fell to the ground. His hollow eyes met mine as he quickly advanced upon me. However, this time I didn't freeze. I knew exactly what I had to do. The one and only defense mechanism built into nymphs, a gift given to us by the gods. I could feel it bubbling up within my soul as Cavan stalked towards me, the eyes of a predator settled intently on me, and I felt an involuntary shiver run through my body. I learned of it when I was young, not from the elders, of course, from Finley, who was never supposed to tell us. The elders had told him he might need it if he left the city and got into trouble. Nymphs could heal any wound or pain inflicted on a person. We could heal. But we also had an ability that many nymphs were still unaware of. Why would we need to protect ourselves in the safety of Arden? We healed wounds, but we stored those wounds in our souls. So to speak, we can heal, but we can also inflict. So as Cavan approached me, I willed this knowledge to give me whatever power I could muster up, and as he reached to grab me, I unleashed it all on him. Isaiah's pain-riddled frame flashed before my eyes, and I willed the same pain to grip Cavan. He gasped sharply as it hit him and fell to the floor, panting softly. I felt regret ripple through me as I watched his shaking body, but I knew that it was the only way to save my friends and me. My friends. That's what they were, and I would do everything I could to protect him. I hated violence, but I could fight back if I needed to, and in this instance, I needed to. My eyes fell to where Lila had pretty much managed to take down Darian. Miranda grabbed the shard of glass I had earlier and shoved it through his chest as a final attack, and then 3 pairs of wild and frantic eyes met each other in the empty hallway. We need to run.
Introductory Author Insight. Author's note: in this finale of Part 1, I wanted to show 2 very different kinds of strength. You have Isaiah, the powerful alpha, completely paralyzed by grief. And then you have Aurelia, the docile prisoner, who actually orchestrates the entire rescue from miles away. This chapter is about the moment the tide turns. It's not about wolves fighting vampires yet, it's about a single piece of paper changing the fate of everyone. Watch how the humans in the town react to Miranda and Aurelia. It proves that while the vampires rule by fear, they have zero loyalty, and that is going to be their downfall.
Chapter 14. Isaiah's POV. I sat, my back against the desk, as I stared blankly ahead at the office door. The room was in chaos, but I didn't even see it. I felt void of any emotion at this stage. Any emotion that managed to trickle and only reminded me of my mate's bright green eyes as she was dragged away from me. That was all the initiative I needed to push it all back out. The desk was overturned and papers were scattered across the room. The walls had also fallen victim to my anger and were lined with holes that I had repeatedly hid in my rage. All I wanted, all I so desperately wished for, was to have my mate with me, to run my fingers through her golden locks and tell her that I'd never let her go again. A knock resonated through the room, and I heard Alistair sigh from the other side of the wood. "Alpha, you've been holed up here for days. You need to get some air." I didn't respond. My mind was in a state of deterioration. I couldn't distinguish if it was too full or too empty anymore, so I tried to focus on nothing, to grasp onto emptiness, and hope that it distracted me from the pain raging in my soul. "Alpha, I think you should look at this," he sighed. I didn't even move until the next sentence came out of his mouth. "It's about the Luna." I was at the door in seconds, throwing it open with such force it flew into the wall with a loud bang. He held a small note in his hands, wrapped in twine. He handed it to me silently, and I all but ripped it open and drank in the words that would lead me to her. "Isaiah, I'm somewhere just outside of South Dakota, in a manor somewhere near the woods. I know that's not much to go on, but that's all I know. Lila is with me, your pack member. I'm okay, but I'm running out of time, and I need your help. I'm sorry I ran away when we met. I was terrified. I know you must have questions, and I promise I will answer as many as I can when I see you. Aurelia." My stony eyes met Alistair's. "How was this delivered?" Alistair scratched his neck nervously. "A bird delivered it." It took a moment for his words to register, but when they did, I began to laugh so hard that it hurt my stomach. My little love had gotten a bird to deliver a note? The thought made me grin widely. "Are the warriors ready?" Alistair nodded. "Yes, Alpha. They've been on standby for the last few days on your order." I nodded. "I'm going to contact one of the subpacks to meet us. I have a rough idea where she is based on information from all the subpacks. There's a manor of vampires by the woods here." I held out a map towards Alistair, where I had outlined the places I thought she might have been. I pointed at one of the large red circles. "I think she's here." Alistair's lip quirked up. "Well, let's go get our Luna." A new fire ignited within me, and I pictured the bright green eyes and gentle smile of a girl I had only held once. "Yeah, let's do that."
Author's insight. I loved writing Isaiah's laughter here. It's the first time we see him truly happy. Realizing his mate isn't just a damsel in distress, but a woman capable of commanding nature to send a message, makes him respect her as much as he desires her.
Story continues. Miranda squealed as we raced down the dirt road. We had fled the manor and were now running like headless chickens. "The nearest town, we can hide there. The wolves will need to pass through there, and we can meet them," Miranda said as we all pushed ourselves to run faster. Both Lila and I could run very fast. Lila had her wolf genes, and I could easily outrun both of them with the speed of a nymph. Miranda didn't have the same speed, so she was currently on Lila's back, who was still in wolf form. We were making good progress, but I was still worried that the vampires would catch up, and paranoia was beginning to eat away at me. I could only hope that Isaiah found the town before the vampires found us. Finally, we reached the entrance to a small town, much like Littlewood. The town was quiet, thankfully. There was a long stretch of road with houses littered here and there before it closed and further down the road and held markets and facilities. Miranda hopped off of Lila's back before motioning for us to follow her. She stopped outside a little grocery shop, but instead of entering through the front, she opened the side gate, where a narrow alley led to the back of the house. Miranda knocked on the door, and a woman opened it, her eyes widening at the sight of us. "Oh dear, Miranda. What's going on?" Miranda looked up at her, courage shining through her dark blue eyes. I noticed in that moment how much strength she held. She had been captured and forced into that way of living for 5 years, and yet she remained resilient and fought for her freedom. My eyes drifted over to Lila, and again I felt my chest fill with pride. Not only had I made friends, but I also had 2 devoted warriors by my side. I felt a connection that I never thought I would feel outside of Arden. I wanted to protect these 2. There are wolves coming in the next few hours. We need a place to hide. Andy, this is it. The High Council will be involved, and finally, the vampires will leave the town. The older woman, Andy, sighed. She had tan skin and dark locks pulled up into a tight bun. I could tell she was a no-nonsense woman, and she nodded tightly, opening the door to allow us entry. Will they be after you? Miranda nodded, and Andy called out into the hallway until 2 men appeared. They were in their early 20s, and I could see the resemblance they had to Andy. I want you 2 to go around and inform the rest of the town. Anyone who saw these 3 come into the shop, do not tell the vampires. We have to hide them for a few hours until their people collect them. This is the chance we've been waiting for. We can finally see the old town revived as new. The 2 men nodded and left promptly, grabbing their jackets as they went. I could feel the tension bubbling up in the room, but Andy turned and offered us a relaxed smile. "So, you finally escaped those monsters, huh?" She made her way over to the little kitchen. I took the time to look around briefly, realizing we couldn't be spotted from where we were, hidden at the back of the shop. She turned the kettle on and turned back to us. Her eyes were hard and her shoulders tense. But there was an underlying emotion running through the room, one that everyone felt and desperately clung to. Hope.
End of chapter analysis. Author's perspective. I ended part 1 with the word hope because that is the most dangerous weapon in this story. When Andy opens that door, it reveals that the vampires haven't just angered a pack of wolves, they've angered an entire town of humans. Aurelia didn't just escape, she started a rebellion. The humans aren't hiding her just because they are nice, they are hiding her because she represents the end of their oppression. Aurelia left Arden to see the world, and she found it cruel and cold. But in this kitchen, she finds something stronger than magic, community. This sets the stage for part 2 perfectly. It's no longer a rescue mission, it's a war, and Aurelia has just recruited the 1st Battalion. Audience engagement questions. The humans in the town are risking execution to hide the girls. Is this bravery, or are they underestimating what Cavan will do when he finds them? Isaiah went from destroyed to ready for war in seconds. Does the mate bond make you stronger, or does it make you unstable? Now that part 1 is over, do you think Aurelia will ever be able to return to her simple life in Arden, or has she seen too much? Part 1 ends with a cup of tea and a plan, but part 2 begins with a collision course. The Alpha is coming, but the Master isn't going to let his prize go without burning the whole town down first.